Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the AUD podcast channel. I'm your host Khaled Abdul-Jabain. We are honored to have Miss Siwar Zein as our guest on the show today. Siwar is a human resources expert and brings with her over 15 years of experience working at some of the world's largest brands such as Nestle, and is currently the Europe, Middle East and Africa Talent Management Director at Microsoft. She is someone who is extremely passionate about supporting people and enabling them to achieve their desired success within an organization. In this episode, you'll learn the impact HR can have on your business, how to build a talent management framework, the challenges of addressing biases in the interview process, and how to retain your top talent. Please join me in welcoming to the show Miss Siwar Zein.
Oh, thank you, Khaled. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming. So Siwar, your work experience is actually quite unique and relevant to, the university and kind of like what AUD does here. So I know you're the talent management director for Europe, Middle East and Africa for Microsoft. You were also Nestle for 9 years doing similar kind of work. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is kind of understand what the talent landscape kind of looks now. Where were we? Where are we now? And like, what does the future look like? I want to understand from you. Selecting the talent, what do you have to look for? What advice are there new tools that we have to start using? What's our CV still relevant? So I have so many questions to dive into. But before we get into all of this, Siwar, why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. I mean, I'm really excited about this session. I'm excited to come back to AD. Fun fact, I did teach here a course, Human Resources Management, for a year. I think it was in 2017 or 2018.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
I have to say it was very thrilling, and I think I'm still connected to some of the students and how they've evolved kind of from university into their careers. So I studied predominantly in Lebanon, but then I knew early on that I wanted to be, in a profession around people. It wasn't human resources at the time, but I wanted to work with people. When you say you want to work with people, that could be 1,001 domains.
That's true,
right?
Very true.
So how did I land on HR? I think there was a point where both my parents used to work. And they used to actually complain around the lack of support in terms of their own development. And I used to listen into their conversations around how they're thinking of their careers and moving. And I thought, wow, that would be really cool if that's something I could do as a profession. So I started reading more about it. And it was at the time where human resources was more personnel, which is like admin stuff, payroll, salary certificates, issuing contracts, recruitment to some extent. And I knew that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. So when I started researching, I started finding programs in human resources in the UK, which were more about the psychology of the human and how in the workplace that translates. And then things around employee relations and things around kind of the HR operating model and things around the organizational behavior. So that scientific part of it was what excited me. Okay. And it also I thought it would be a profession that opens the doors to work cross-industry, because I wasn't sure around kind of the industry I wanted to work in. Is it retail? Is it tech? Is it, So at the time I thought, great, so this is something with people, a bit of psychology, which is also a passion of mine, and also cross-industry. So that's how it started. So it was quite intentional. Okay. When I started sharing with some of my, friends and family and so on, they're like, what? I did have a 4.0 GPA, so I think they expected that I'd continue into something around maths and academia and so on. But then I went to the UK, and that's where I did my human resources master's degree. Loved it. Landed directly into a job in Barclays Commercial Bank in the UK at the time of the recession at the time. So that was pretty interesting, because it was straight into core HR experience. Managing redundancies, managing employee morale, engagement.
You were thrown in the deep end. Huh?
Yeah, I have to say it was really unplanned, and it was a bit of a cultural shock, but really loved it. And then I thought, initially, so I did get a scholarship to go to the UK, and part of that scholarship was to come back into the region with a promise, not an enforcement, but more a promise to come back into the region, to the Middle East, and kind of give back what we've learned. And I felt very deeply around that. So I did go back to Lebanon. That's where I started with Nestle. And then with them, I moved quite a few locations. So primarily Kuwait. Also thrown in the deep end there. Great experience. Turned over 40% of the organization. Hired in, we had a full people plan, all of that. We, moved business from a degrowth to a plus 11% growth, a double digit, because of just kind of people change and leadership change. I started seeing the impact of what this profession can do. And I have to say, like the rest, I don't want to say is history because I'm still writing it as we go, but I did start moving cross roles. I moved into talent management. I had built a team around leadership development, diversity and inclusion, all of that.
So talent management, sorry to interrupt you, is talent management just one of a potential function of HR, or does talent management have its own mindset and skill set that you kind of have to develop? Because I guess hiring people is a whole, different story. And that's where all that psychology and all the stuff that you studied before would probably come in handy.
That's such a good question, I think. And it's also a misconception. So it's around what talent management is. So talent management is not only acquisition. So talent acquisition is hiring in. Talent management is you bring them in based on what you're looking at from skills and capabilities and mindsets. Then you develop them in the organization. Then you make sure you are future-proofing that organization by ensuring you have things like succession planning. If I have senior key roles that are vacant for more than a month, the impact on the business will be huge. So how can I ensure we have a bench of internal people? How are we developing and growing those internal people? How do we identify talent? When we say somebody has great potential, what does that mean? When we say somebody has great leadership potential, what does that mean for us as an organization? So how do we identify them? And then we ready them so that when they're ready to assume the role, but then how do you support them when they've assumed the role to kind of deliver and drive impact? So it's really across versus then just at one specific life cycle. When your second question was, does it require specific skill set and expertise? Over time, it has started to require that expertise.
So it didn't before.
Exactly. Actually, when I first stepped into the role, I wasn't a professional talent manager. I had a mindset around how to approach talent management, and then I learned the skills around, coaching, development. How do you grow people? How do you assess potential? These things. So over time, it's become a discipline within human resources.
Very interesting. And you made such a good point that, because I think I was part of the misconception that all talent management, my mind automatically goes to acquisition only, but the way you've described it, it's a whole process. It's, for today, for tomorrow, and for, looking forward. So on that point, because you're trying to not only, because I'm sure there are times you might have, like, as you're saying, a senior gap that you need to fill. So there's like that short-term need that we need to fill this because in 6 months this might have a big effect on the business. But also especially when you're hiring like directors, from the research that I've done and learned, that's where you need to be super specific, because down the line, that's what's you might not see it in 6 months, but in 2 years, you're gonna see the impact of that hire. So how do you manage the balance between, okay, we need to fill this position now, but we also need to be thinking long-term strategic. Does this person fit today and the future?
I love that, because I think one of the things continue to enforce within our broader HR team is in HR, it's not, even talent management, we're not on our own. What we do impacts the business.
Sure.
So to your point, if we're bringing in somebody, if you think about it, a wrong hire will cost us a year. Because between the cycle of hiring somebody and bringing them in and the interviews and determining their right and their notice periods, that's 6 months.
True.
3 to 6 months probation, and you see them whether they're, and then you have to decide whether you keep them or not. I'll push that even forward. It might be another 6 months until you can backfill if the person is not landing. So that's 18 months of impact, on direct impact on people and on the business.
Wow.
So when you think of it from that perspective, you're like, no, it's better that I take great care. When we're hiring people, we look at them holistically from their previous experience, from just their mindset, leadership, how they think, cultural fit, and then there's an element always of risk and
of course
hiring and
it's
seeing
people.
how.
It's people at the end of the day,
Absolutely.
you know.
Yeah.
We're very unpredictable. We're very unpredictable.
Yes, I think with time, like the science behind it again. Why you'll keep hearing me say the science behind it, because also I try to, as much as possible, debunk the myth of, it's a judgment based or a or a subjective selection process. There's always an element of subjectivity,
of course,
but it's moved more and more into a behavioral science, which has become with time more predictable. What do I mean by that?
Sure.
I think there are very large consultancies and firms which have studied this for a long time, whereby you can do assessments on behavior and potential and so on. You can never take them at face value and say this is it, but it's kind of indicative. So that's that will share with you indicatively that whether this person is, has similar value, skill sets, mindset, outlook, and so on. Then there's the aspect of in the interview itself, how people show up, the kind of questions you ask, so also behavioral-based science questions. And then there's the element of judgment and, knowing people and having worked with them before.
On that, it's funny you brought up the interview part. So we had a previous guest on the podcast, and we actually went out for coffee after one time, and he was explaining to me, he's like, Khaled, when I hire people, this is what I do. He was the ex-CEO of My Dubai. Shout out Alexander if you're listening. So he was like, I go to a coffee shop, I tell them, come meet me here after the first interview. Because I want to assess, how were they on time? Did they wait for me to order? Like, what is he analyzed it from so many different angles, which I thought was very interesting. He's like, Khaled, the first 5 minutes of an interview, you know exactly what that person's about. And the next 45 are about just confirming that first 5. Would you agree or disagree with that?
It's a hard one. Maybe I'm not as black and white on that, or I'm not as black and white. I do believe that some people generally interview well.
Okay.
And it may also not really be indicative of how they are, the actual role. And others who interview maybe less so, but can be as effective. I think there are elements as well that we need to include from inclusion and diversity inclusion perspective. It's a muscle we need to build to think through, maybe a person in the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes or even 45 minutes were a bit shy. But then that's because they have more of an introverted personality. It takes time for them to start kind of assimilating their thoughts and their ideas and be as outspoken as you or me or someone else.
Yeah.
And I think what I've seen is that actually what is more linked for me with solid hiring success is when several people who are very different are in a hiring loop. They've all met adequately with this one person. We compare notes after we've met them versus before or during, so that we don't influence each other. And then we come to a conclusion as to whether this person will be a fit or not.
Okay.
Because then you question your biases, you question your assumptions, and you're more likely, with a diverse group of people thinking, you're more likely to make a right choice.
Sure.
So I'm a bit more inclined towards a longer kind of process than 5 minutes.
But I think because, as you said earlier, it's impossible to remove subjectivity 100% where it's people hiring people, so it's always going to be there. But developing either a framework or criteria to be assessed on, and the point you made is so true, because we're all sometimes blind to our biases, and just because me and you might get along subconsciously, I might be like, oh yeah, he'd be really good or he or she would be great for the job, but they might be we might just have good chemistry as people, but from a talent perspective, it might not be there. And you said something earlier about assessing talent. Now, how do you do that? Because is when you're saying assessing talent, is it kind of like what we talked about earlier? It's not just how you assess it in that recruitment process, but during, and then like how long they're there for, or is it a little bit different?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's it's looking at the person as a whole.
Okay.
There's a piece around their previous experiences, where they've worked. When we're asking them questions, which are, not yes or no questions,
like
they're more
open-ended
around,
ones.
share with me a story or share with me an example of where you felt it was a difficult situation that you navigated.
Standard question.
Like open-ended.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit more. And then you start navigating and trying to link it with values, principles, competencies that you value as an organization. Relatively, with time and practice, you become relatively spot on, right? So there's a piece around assessment, which is looking at the person holistically, their previous experience, in the moment, how they reflect around failures from before, successes from before. And I have to say, like, I've found, again, and maybe this, the risk of being repetitive, that 360 view always balances me out, personally.
Yeah.
I face my biases on a daily basis, in the sense, like, I'm known to really like people who are hungry and humble. And what I mean by this is people who are like, I'm going to come, I'm going to change the world, I'm going to do this. And at the same time, I'm going to learn while I'm doing it. I'm not perfect, but I'm very growth mindset. So once you come into an interview with me with this mindset, I have to tell you, you're already won me half over. So that always balances, like, I ask my colleagues and loops and so on, to just like, can you balance me out? Because that person won me over in the first 30 minutes. And, so I think having others with you in the assessment process helps you stay on point.
And I think that's that's a really, really important point. Even in reflecting on the times I've interviewed, it was never just with one person. It was always with different people, different tiers, different experiences. I noticed in my experience when I was joining startups that, so I worked in corporates and startups, but in startups, culture was very, very important. Like, maybe I had like 4 proper interviews, but I'd have like maybe 2, 3 coffees or, something like that, because they really want to understand how do you fit. So coming on to the whole culture thing, and the timing of this conversation is perfect, because I just started reading a book recently, like a week ago, called The Culture Map. And it's been like, and every day I'm reading it, I'm like, wow, like this is so interesting. So, and you touched on culture earlier a little bit, and the importance of communication and creating a culture within an environment that everyone, can join into. But what I've learned recently is that communication styles are different. Culture is different. There's high context and low context. There's the West that's outspoken, and what I mean is what I say. And then in other parts of the world, it's more like you have to read between the lines. It's subtle. So in your experience, because you've been, in HR for a while, so you've been dealing with people for a while, I'm curious to understand from you, what have you learned about culture over the experience of your career?
How long is this podcast?
As long as you want.
and it's less to it's in no way, shape or form to say I am an expert on culture at all. I think we're all learning, and we're going to continue to learn.
For sure.
I would say, though, it's a real topic of passion for me. And interestingly, I was actually reflecting with a friend the other day and say, I don't think I can work with a non-diverse, non-international context anymore. Like, I reached a point where it's become the reason why I like what I do, because I get to experience it from different lenses and perspectives, and it's thrilling and it's exciting and it's a learning every day. And
absolutely,
I love that. So that's why, for me, this is a big topic I'm passionate about. I think, a few things. We start with, even that culture map and how it describes. Underlying in that should be the assumption that I should not make an assumption that because this person is coming from a Western, they're going to be more outspoken. And so it's quite nuanced if you think about it.
Absolutely, yeah, for
right?
sure. Yeah,
because we're talking about appreciating people thinking differently and looking, but then we're kind of assuming certain stereotypes
Also, yeah.
For certain.
True,
So
true.
I think there's that one piece of understanding enough to navigate, understanding that there are nuances. It's understanding that there are ways we've been raised,
Absolutely,
which are, you know, if I say no and I shake my head in a certain way and somebody says no in a different way, or actually when you're in a context or a culture which is lower context, how you come across and like lower your tone, you know, just being mindful of how you come across, starting with the fact to say, hey, I tend to speak quite loud, like I have quite a loud voice, you know, that's just how I come across. So please just hold me accountable or share with me feedback if I'm too much, right? Or in my context and culture, like we interrupt each other, and that's absolutely fine. That's how we have a conversation. And I had learned multiple times the hard way that there are a lot of other contexts that, you know, find this inappropriate or disrespectful. So I think I go back to the principle, and I'll try to summarize. Knowing enough to be able to navigate, but not assuming that's the case for all, because that's the whole point. We're different human beings, and it's not just our culture that defines us, it's our experiences, it's what we learned, it's where we traveled, it's who we've engaged with, it's who we got married to, who, you know, who were our friends. So it's quite a broad topic.
It is a very broad topic, and there are so many nuances, because you talked about earlier, even like in an interview process, whether it's not cultural, not just even within a culture, there's still different personalities. There's that subjectivity. So it's like, okay, so I have to be mindful that you might not be an outspoken person in this, but then I have to think level 2, okay, culturally, where's this person from? Are they kind of like that? And then there's that unique aspect. So there's so many layers that you could, I think, just keep peeling back.
Oh my God, Khaled, like I've became worse in terms of hiring people, and I'm going like viral with this probably because now I go into an interview considering all these factors. What if it's me being biased, and what if I'm not being inclusive? And we often joke about it with my colleagues to say, I used to be able to make decisions quite faster. Now it takes me time, and that's why I value other people's opinions, because it helps me see things from a different perspective.
But that's it's so true that there's, like, again, we keep coming back to the different perspective thing and how important that is. And one thing, another book I read recently was talking about how when you hire someone, let's say you've hired someone and that person ends up being either not performing or it doesn't fit the culture and so on. What the book was saying is that at the end of the day, as the CEO or the person responsible for the hiring, even if, because you can only do your best job, right? There's only so much you can do. You, based on the analysis, you're like, this person will fit. Only time will tell. Time always tells. But at the end of the day, whatever that outcome is, it's still the responsibility, whether good or bad, or accountability will fall on you, the hiring person, because you're the one who brought them. Is that fair to say?
Let me say it this way. I do feel quite responsible and accountable to bring in the right folks into the organization. And if they don't succeed, but it's not only bringing them in, it's also once they're in, helping them navigate to succeed. Coaching them on what it takes. So for me, if I assume both, I feel kind of accountable and responsible with it. So in short, yes, to some extent. In a bit more an elaborate way, I think there's also people who say, I'm quite agile, this is what I've done, and then sometimes they come in the moment and things change for them, or things don't click for them. And those are personal choices. But yes, to a large extent, I do feel accountable.
And it was, the reason that was, I guess, surprising for me is just that it never really clicked in my head that, like, if you really think about it and draw it back to like the essence of it, it makes sense that that person at the end of the day, if you didn't bring them in, maybe that would not have happened, or vice versa. So I know you were at Nestle for a while, and then you moved on to Microsoft. So obviously and you kind of touched on this earlier about like HR as a profession is something that is applicable to so many industries and so many things. It reminds me kind of like, I would liken it to, marketing or skills that are transferable to different industries.
Yes.
But the only difference is there's a knowledge and culture gap that you need to learn to get there.
Yeah.
So going from like F&B
Yeah.
to tech is not only in industries completely different, the people in those industries are completely different. So I'd love to hear from you. How was that transition? Was it challenging? Was there anything that surprised you? I know we touched on a few things before, but anything else?
So, I mean, just fun story. In the interview process, the thing I was worried about the most was how technical should I be? And I asked the question, I said, look, the most technical I can be is turn on my laptop, and if it's not working, I'll call a friend or restart. Like, that's how technical I was. And they kind of like they assured me to say, that's not why we're hiring you. You're not an engineer. You're not here to code. So don't worry. There's going to be plenty of people to help you. I think two things I learned. One, people are people. In this industry, in that industry, they have dreams. They have ambitions. They're there to learn. They're there for their livelihoods. They're, a lot of them are providing for their families, particularly in this region. A lot are expats as well.
True.
And they're here because they have a goal and they dreamed of a certain life and they wanted, they're working in a multinational context. So I think I learned that people are people. And yes, the types of professions are different. Yes, the seniority or the depth or technical intensity is different on professional side, but on the people front, they're the same, right? So that I would share with lots of people, say, unless you're going into it where you're the technical expert, if you're going into a support type of function like a finance or a legal or an HR, like knowledge of industry is a plus, it's not a must.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can learn the industry and so on. The second piece, though, is do not underestimate that once you're in, you need to involve yourself in the business. You need to understand how the business operates, how it works. So I was a bit sharing with vulnerability. I was a bit, okay, I'm out of my depth. I go into the first meeting, they're speaking abbreviation heaven, using words like ACR and ESIF, and and I'm like, I used to know that, in my previous company. Now I don't. And it's in an industry like tech where we're selling the cloud, it's very different than when you're selling a product.
Absolutely.
A product, we go to the supermarket, we see it, it's tangible, you can taste it, you can try it, you can give a view on it. When you're selling the cloud, that's a different ballgame.
100%.
So, and it's not only selling kind of what people assume Microsoft does, which is, Microsoft Word and Office. That's, that one you can provide, but that's the smallest, it's a smaller chunk, not the smallest, it's a smaller chunk.
Yeah.
So long story short, I think, just having the courage to go in, to ask the questions, to understand the industry, because then that helps you understand what motivates people to drive for performance and impact,
Yeah.
So I think these were my two learnings. People are people. Don't underestimate how deep though you need to go in the industry quick and understand it so that you're able to connect it to your profession.
I love that answer because my wife actually is going through a similar experience now, joining a new industry and so on, and everything you've been saying is what she's been telling me, and I told her kind of like what you were saying, you can't expect to just be it's not like a plug and play. There's a whole knowledge base behind this. There's a whole way to approach it. Clients, even in my experience, my background was in sales. I used to work with Cisco, so I was selling switches and boxes and whatever. So it was something, so very similar to, your world. And then I went to, HR tech and then medical tech. I don't know anything about any of these things, but it is a learning curve. And I think we just, as people, we are naturally default, we're impatient. We want to be perfect all the time, ready from the moment, but that's not how it works. Okay. I want to understand your thoughts about HR in the UAE. And the reason, and I'm asking this question for a particular reason, because I can say this from not my personal experience, but from the experience of, I would say, 80 to 90% of the people I know, I haven't heard once that like, oh, that company is doing HR correctly. It's in 90% of the cases that I've heard, it's all just kind of what you're talking about. All admin work, checks and balance, warnings that they're not approachable. I don't, maybe, and again, you know much more, you've done this. I'm just speaking from the experience, what I've heard and what I've seen. It seems that there's a massive gap here in how HR should be functioning.
I mean, that's great feedback. I've been fortunate in the two organizations that I've worked with in the UAE. They've both had very strong HR practices.
Okay.
So I understand I come from that place of privilege.
Sure.
Right? Where I say, of course, there's room to do better and more or different, but they both were in a good stance. Having said that, being part of the HR community here.
Exactly, you would know.
You know, and I speak to like-minded human resource professionals. I have to say, it's you're right in the sense it's contingent from company to company.
For sure.
And it's contingent on what the business leaders want from that function. So it goes back.
Oh, that's a good point. I've never. Okay, could you tell me a little bit more about that aspect? Okay.
Because for me, if a business leader believes that they're in the people business first, and then in whatever they're selling, they're gonna want their best co-pilot HR person with them. And if they don't, then they're going to hire somebody with an admin profile to say, this is what I need you to do. You're not empowered to do otherwise. And I have to say, I've met so many great HR professionals, but that just were in an organization that didn't value them as a function or in their capabilities. So I have to kind of shout out to my HR colleagues, maybe not everyone, but my HR peers in the industry to say, we have really good talent. I do think it's companies and what they expect and what. So that's why for me, when I, thought, hey, maybe it's time for me. I've spent 10 years in one company. Maybe it's time for me to experience another industry. I want to strategically move into another space. And then I was very selective of where I'd go because I knew that I already had a high bar and I would want to go to a place where I was going to feel valued and I can give my all to it, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it perfectly answers my question. And you brought up a point that I've never even thought of before is what does the business leader want from this function?
Yeah.
And I've never, because I'm not in HR, and from what I've heard, HR for me, from what I hear is what I was explaining earlier. It's like, you go to HR to my leave, my this, no. But you made such a good point that if the leader of the business is going with people first and understanding that to provide the best access for or roadmap for your employees, you need to have the best people in HR to allow them to do that and to build that and to grow that. And when you talk about, so how would you measure, so let's say when it comes to talent management, is it like you guys set like programs for like 3 years and how do you like assess it? Because I'm curious, what are the factors that go into building out a, let's say, talent management ecosystem? Is that what you'd call it?
Framework.
Framework.
No, that's great. I paused a bit to say, is it ecosystem? Is it framework? Because it can be. I think I want to try to do it simply and with clarity, and without making it to be a more sophisticated function than it necessarily is. In basic terms, we say this is where the business is headed. Let's say as a company now, we're AI, right? We're in the artificial intelligence kind of era. It has arrived.
Oh yeah, we're here.
As a company, we are leading the way on this, I'll say that bravely and with courage because we are. So what does that mean for us in terms of the talent we want to bring in? What does that mean in terms of our existing talent and how we want to build their capability so that they are AI enabled and they can thrive? And what does that mean for us in terms of thinking about the talent pools that we need to, or the communities in AI that we need to create within the organization and the leaders of tomorrow? So we would work on defining that with the business.
Okay.
As long as it's connected to the business goal. And I think this is where sometimes HR goes a bit off. If you do a plan which is not connected to what you want to achieve as a business, it's, my words, not anybody else's words, but it's not very useful. So going back to this is today what we are doing.
Sure.
We're saying, what does it mean when we say AI talent? Are we all AI talent? Should HR also be AI enabled? Fine. Technically, yes, because AI is going to be like think about the internet. Everybody uses the internet.
Exactly.
Think about so what does it mean to be AI talent? Is it all of us to be AI talent? If we say we're going to build capabilities, or we're going to build everybody's organization to the same extent, probably not. Your sellers, to what extent will you want them to be AI enabled? And vice versa. I'll give you an example, and hopefully that will explain. I think I look at Microsoft as a company, or other tech companies. Before, they used to hire people who can do sales. So besides engineering and coding and developing the code, which that's a massive and the biggest chunk of our organization.
For sure.
Another chunk is the people who sell this technology to other companies. Before, you used to be able to help to bring in somebody who has great sales skills and teach them the technology, because they'll learn it, they'll come to speed with it. What it was, Office and Word, so you can talk to it and so on. Now it's become so complex that we're looking at it a bit differently. So the talent strategy has become, we hire technical talent and we build their sales capability.
Ah, interesting.
So strategically, things have shifted with the business evolving.
Okay.
And to answer you, that's one example where, from a talent management perspective, say, okay, now we need to weave that into all our practices. What does that look like? What does that mean? And so on.
That example explains it, perfectly. And because I was just thinking, based on what you're saying, I'm like, so it sounds like what Siwar is saying is that now, because the demands of the world are changing, because technology is changing, and AI, we've all, exactly like you said, the internet came. My philosophy is, or my prediction is, the people who will win in the next 20, 30 years are not the people who necessarily need to learn how to build an AI, but the ones who know how to use the right tools most effectively.
Absolutely.
That's what I believe. What would you agree?
Absolutely. I think, it's a fun, sorry, I'm all full of stories today, but my husband and I had a conversation. Our son was pretty young, and he said, he should probably start learning coding, because coding is the next language of the future and so on. That was like 10 years ago. Now there are apps that, like Power Apps and so on, that help you actually build applications. You don't have to know a single word of code.
I know.
So can you imagine, and I'm not saying that language is obsolete, but soon it will be, because we've built the technology on top of it that will help us do it without knowing. So can you imagine a full language became obsolete in such a short, or becoming obsolete in such a short time? And to your point, it's less about knowing the code. It's more how to use the tool that can code for you.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
you and I are predicting the future. I think we're on the right track.
Okay, good. Guys, we're on the right track. Please feel free to, send us feedback if you think we're wrong. I wanted to come on to Siwar, to the kind of the interview and hiring process, okay? Because I have a very, what's the word? How would I explain this? Biased, or not the nicest view of it. My philosophy is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure there will be a lot of people who disagree with me. When I was first looking for work, when I was younger, there were so many. There were lots of companies that wanted you to do a test first. I know every company gets thousands of applications, and I understand that you have to weed it out in some way. However, what I've learned in my experience is, I got to a point, I'm like, if a company needs a test to judge me before you even know my potential, my personality, my capability, this is a very personal thing. As Khalid, I'm like, I'm not interested in this kind of company. If you want to meet me and then test me, at least get a feel for who I am first and then give me a test, that's fine. But obviously, every company has a different interview process.
Yes.
Every company is completely different in how they assess, how many. So how, for you, in your experience, when it comes to the interview process, have you tweaked things? Besides the fact that more people are involved,
Yes.
have you learned like, oh, it doesn't need to be 10, we can do it in 3?
Yes.
Or we need like interview 1, test, then maybe 2, 3, 4, or whatever.
Yes.
So what kind of framework have you kind of put together yourself?
Great question. Simply, we've removed tests and assessments out.
Hey, fantastic. Microsoft, if you're hiring, hello.
We've removed tests and assessments out. We go with more behavioral-based interviewing approach, a loop of hiring. We generally try to keep it 3 to 4, okay? But some of them might, like, I think of myself as a hiring manager, I like to see the candidate twice. So I like to see them in the beginning of the process where I'm screening, and then I like to see them towards the end of the process. Because, we need to also think of interviews, and that's as a two-way thing. It's not a one way. I'm not just interviewing you and you're coming into my organization. You need to interview me as well. And I will learn probably more about you through your questions than about what interests you, what's important to you, than just me sitting you down, listening and just asking questions. So I think removing assessments, having it as a two-way, making interview loops not too long, but also not too small. Having a diverse, we've spoken about like the diverse people sitting on the panel. If there was an assessment or kind of test, generally we would introduce that towards after we've selected the person. And that should be for us to help them as they onboard to say, hey, like this is kind of so these are some of the watch outs, these are some of the things you may want to focus on, these are some of the things these might come to play with. So I see them more as hiring as support and enabling success than as a selection.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I wish more companies would, apply that framework, because it is, like the whole test thing obviously is to, see which candidates have the most relevant skills or knowledge that would fit before the personality. But I really like the way that you guys do it, because the technical technique, I've read so many books and you can watch so many podcasts. You've heard it a million times. You probably said it a million times. I've said it. Again, it's about attitude and mindset will trump skills or technical skills or knowledge any day of the week, hands down. So that's why, for me, that's why I think, and I didn't have great experience with tests either. That's why I think my perspective on it has always been, it's just, man, it's about the person, not about what they know or how they know. They can learn that.
Yeah.
Everything is learnable.
I fully agree. I'm a big believer in mindset as well. And as a company, it's one of the reasons I came into Microsoft, because I started reading about it as a company and the culture transformation that they had in the last 10 years, which is all based on the book by Carol Dweck, which is called Growth Mindset.
That's a great book.
You've read it. Amazing, because I was going to add that to your list. For me, when I read that, such a simple read. And it just transformed how I look at everything, be it my team, at work, leaders I work with, at home with my kids, and just trying to inspire to say, to your point, it is so much about the mindset. You can look at the same exact challenge or problem from so many different angles, and one of them will always see the growth mindset and what is the learning. I don't know this yet. This is something I can do if I learn, and like just the attitude and so on. So I'm again a big fan of that.
Yeah. And you know what? I've read that book too. Obviously, I've known for a long time about fixed versus growth mindset. But I had someone on my podcast who's into neuroscience and that, and we kind of talked. And I talked to him about this because. And what I learned from him was, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but it's relevant, that I thought fixed mindset and growth mindset were black and white. Yes. So either Khaled is a fixed mindset person or a growth mindset person, I didn't know that you could have a fixed mind. I could have a fixed mindset in some things and a growth in others. And that for me was just like a whoosh, like mind blown. It just opened up so many doors.
I'll share with you a trick. And it's not a trick I use. I actually used it naturally, spontaneous. I'm very spontaneous actually. So I used it once, and then somebody in my team came and said, and I'll share with you what I did. Just in a meeting, they were sharing kind of changes that we were going to go through as an org. And I said, hey, look, I might be having a fixed mindset moment now. but I need to ask this question. And I kind of challenged a bit the change that was coming. And then we discussed it and said, okay, fine, thank you. That helps me. And then one of my team members came and said, thank you so much for doing that. Because I was thinking the exact same. And I was thinking, am I resisting change? Am I being fixed mindset? But the way you phrase it as I was having a fixed mindset moment.
Yeah.
It was less judgmental on self as well, because we're human beings also. And we're, very few of us like regular change every single day. We like a certain level of consistency and stability. So just adding to that, there are also sometimes fixed mindset moments. It doesn't mean you are fixed mindset.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is why I love doing this. I love these conversations because, I always walk away with something someone said. I'm like, that sticks, and I will bring it up in future episodes as well. Because I love phrasing it as a fixed mindset moment, because adding the word moment takes away that pressure, whether I have to be fixed or I have to be, growth focused. Coming on to just looking now at I wanted to ask you this. So COVID changed things, right? The world shut down for 2 years.
Yes.
Remote and hybrid work became like something that's more common now.
Yes.
I know there's we'll get into the remote versus in-office debate in a second, but
it's coming.
I feel that, because I can look at it from two ways. On one side, I'm like, hiring talent has become much easier because COVID opened up the world to show that, the world can function remotely, and you can now have access to a pool of talent globally, and sometimes might even be at a lower cost than what you would pay here.
Yes.
At the same time, now if you flip it,
Yeah.
it's also now 10 times harder because of that. So from your perspective, where do you fall? Do you think it's become harder or easier in your opinion?
I will say easier with some hard components, right? It's always the and, it's not the or, right? But I would say it's easier to some extent. I think about my own story on this one. So I had just joined Microsoft, 4 or 5 months. I was traveling. I went to Nigeria. I was in Kenya. I was going to Morocco. I was all over. And then, because I was overseeing at the time the African cluster. And then COVID happened. We all moved. Luckily, we had the technology, right, as a company, and it was a mindset. It was okay to work virtually. So it wasn't a thing for us. It was like, okay, it's like, we just switch, and now we need to support more people. But you're right. Even as a company that had worked virtually for a few years by then, that had the technology for it, we were still bound by where we hire people to do certain pieces of work. Since then, I've seen it unlock so many things. For me, on a personal level, that's when I found myself moving into a Europe, Middle East, and Africa role based out in Dubai, which is not quite common because a Europe, Middle East, and Africa role is usually based out in Europe. So I think, I've directly benefited from this, so I feel probably subjective around it.
Sure.
But I've also seen how we've been more open to global talent, amazing talent. Because what COVID has also done is we see a direct correlation between pre and post-COVID, and then post-COVID and people with less desire to be mobile and to move. Because people have saw their governments and saw countries and we're watching and they also said life is short, things may happen. Do I want to be stuck in another country and not be able to travel for a good 18 months without a PCR test or whatever it is? So people, you see them saying, I'm ready to do the flexible hours, just I don't want to move from where I'm based. So we see that more and more. So taking roles to talent versus bringing people to roles in other locations is, I think, the right approach. So so I see that more on the pro side. On the negative side, and I don't want to say the word negative, but there's always pros and cons. There's always an opportunity cost, right?
Absolutely.
You see people working in crazy hours today, right? I see my colleagues in Asia who have selected to stay in Asia, but then they're on calls with us. It's 11 p.m. for me because it's 11 a.m. in the US. So it's their morning, it's my late evening, but it's 12:30 for them. It's kind of their morning, and that's hard. Does that happen regularly? No. But when it happens, I think we all have a responsibility to say, look, like this person chose to be based out that location, yes. We took the role to where that person is. We accommodated, yes. They're accommodating to a certain extent, but there should be boundaries. Like there should be.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm not saying that happens all the time. I think this was a bit of a push, but we do find ourselves working at odd hours now.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And you know what I hear from people. Everyone has a different perspective on this. I'm a big believer in. I understand the benefits of the office. Don't get me wrong. I think there's an energy or a chemistry that you can build in the office that is not impossible to build online, but it will take longer. You need like that face-to-face interaction does help. But what I don't like personally is that I don't like that and there's a lot of companies that decided, nope, everyone has to be back in the office just to, and if you're doing it, if there's a genuine reason, fine. But it's not, and it's just like it's a needless power play. The whole world shut down. Yani, mashallah, everyone works.
Continues.
So there's proof, there was
the biggest experiment.
Thank you very much. COVID settled that debate. So now looking at, I guess, like young students that are about to like graduate and so on, I was thinking, I'm like, okay, we've talked a lot today about like, how we used to assess talent, where's talent going, AI, remote working, all these things are changing. I think today, personally, you tell me, this is my perspective, you tell me what you think.
Please.
I think CVs today are absolutely useless.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
But, for example, now my CV, if someone was gonna hire me, I wouldn't send them my CV. I'd be like, go look at my LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That is my CV. So I feel like now there's been a shift from like not just like what have I done, 1, 2, 3, but your personal, if you want, brand or your presence. Who is Siwar? Who is Khalid? Oh, let's go check them out. Oh, they do this, and look who they've met and commented. So I feel that now for younger people is more important to be putting energy into that than necessarily like CV work. What would you say?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah?
Also because LinkedIn is a company owned by Microsoft. So another yes.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. I didn't know
that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
LinkedIn, let's exactly. Go. So I need to support. No, I mean, in jokes aside, I think definitely, I think that's become more of an enabler. I do think though, when I've spoken to students, they find it hard because LinkedIn is so far still designed as a professional network, which it is. It is. And they find it hard to say, what am I going to put for myself? I'm going to say, am I the student president in my school? Or I was. So I think there's a certain, you're making such a good point, because what's going on in my mind is how do we make LinkedIn more accessible for the youth as well, in terms of what they position, and how do we guide them on what to put there? Like, what are the prompts we can put to say, hey, have you considered the experience I've done here, and have you considered that, and do you want to share an article, or do you want to share your thoughts on this? So I think we can do a better job to make that technology a bit more accessible for them, and kind of they feel it connects to them, but definitely where you're headed. The only risk is that there's still so many companies that do look at resumes. So I think we're going to go through a period of having both. I think so. Yeah. I don't think one is going to replace the other just yet. In the future, I think it would. Yes. But you're 100% right. I think at the moment it is going to be some type of hybrid, between the two. And you made a good point about LinkedIn, because it is a professional network. I only started really putting work into LinkedIn when I started working. Yeah. But I've seen over the last couple of years, when I put in the work on LinkedIn, you get results that you don't expect. And it's been a big, shock to me. And now that's why I tell everyone, guys,
Do you have a business? LinkedIn, post, engage, share, whatever, comment. But it's funny that you mentioned that because my younger sister now, who's 19, and she's about to, she's studying law and she wants to do some internships and stuff. She's like, she messaged me, Khalid,
what do I do?
What do I do? Like, I need a LinkedIn. Make me a LinkedIn. I'm like, okay, but then like, but why and how do I post and what do I do? You know, it's so foreign to them at that age.
Yeah.
But I think these are the kind of things that not only they will start thinking about, but I think employers are shifting to, you know, as well, to start how, you know, they're assessing people, you know. So I wanted to ask about, because we talked about talent management, I just want to round off the conversation. So we've talked about acquisitions, we've talked about building them up. We haven't really talked about retention.
Yeah.
How do I keep you? Because, okay, financial is one thing, but you know, what we've learned in our experience, I think COVID showed us that, okay, let's say I get paid more here, but I can maybe work from home.
Yes.
I have more flexibility.
Absolutely.
I have maybe more days off. So, but besides the typical incentives that we all know and probably use, what other ways, or in your mind, what have you found to be key or important things maybe to think about when it comes to retaining talent?
So I've been working on this theory of mine, and it's still very much in my mind, so bear with me, right? And it's largely based on reading and other people's thoughts as well. So it's not just, I do not claim the IP for it, okay?
We're excited. It's a world premiere. We're excited.
You have to put a whole disclaimer before you say anything nowadays. But there is a piece which we learned, which is retention is very individual. It's very individual. Like the reasons, your motives, and you implied it, the motives you would stay are different than what make me stay, are different what my, you know, like A, B person would stay. So we've learned that the reasons why people leave or stay are very different.
True.
So where does that take us? It means we need to understand the person's motives. Why do they do what they do? Is it the company's mission and how their work relates to it? Some people, yes. Some people, no, not really. Is it the financial aspect? Some people, yes. But often it's not really the only thing, because you still can get financials elsewhere. Is it the growth and development? For some people, yes. For others, it's the flexibility. So again, why am I saying this? Because the only way to be able, who's the closest person to this employee? It's not HR. We're not scaled. Our number is not scaled enough to know every single person's desires and ambitions and what keeps them.
And you can't.
Right?
You can't make everyone happy. It's impossible.
It's the manager. So the manager is the closest person to their team. Because if we think about span of control, you might have anywhere between 2, 3, to 10, 12. If you have more, 15, let's talk, right? So it depends which industry you're in. But then still, that's something scalable. So we then started to index on the manager and build the manager's capability to have stay conversation, retention conversations, development conversations, and understand what makes people tick, what makes people stay, and then also share with them what are the tools that they have at their hands to be able to use with their teams, to be able to keep them and so on.
Yeah.
So the moment I've seen that we've drawn that connection, you see higher retention. The moment where your manager's kind of not empowered or saying, hey, you need to have a conversation with HR, or you need to have you see that less of that accountability, you see a correlation with retention.
Okay.
I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, the point about how to retain them and keep them like closing that loop that you were talking about, you know, having that whole journey. One of my first manager ever, he told me, and I never forgot this. He's like, Khalid, people don't leave jobs, people leave managers.
Yeah.
And you're right in the sense that your manager is your closest direct contact to whatever else where you're trying to go in the organization. And if they themselves aren't, if your manager isn't managed well, how are they going to manage you well?
Yes.
You know, so it's what blows my mind is how much of it's a trickle-down effect.
I love that. I think because there's so much of a modeling that we need to do
Exactly.
at the top and how we show up. I think that's definitely a conversation. We, one of the things, again, just, the company I'm in today have a great manager framework as well, to say manager expectations, to model, to coach, and to care.
That last one is probably,
right?
Yeah.
And I cannot imagine how we would have gone through things like COVID, through the difficult year in tech last year, without our manager capabilities on modeling, coaching, and caring.
Yeah.
Spot on in that.
Yeah, and I think you made a great point about modeling it, and that last element that probably gets probably overlooked the most often, which is the most significant one, is caring about your employees, protecting them, and helping them grow. Because if you do your job well and they do their job well, it's going to make your life easier. It's going to make everyone's life a lot easier.
Absolutely.
Siwar, I want to be conscious of our time,
yes.
So I just have one more question for you. So the reason we started this podcast is we wanted to showcase that success comes in many forms and learning never stops. And alhamdulillah, I've been very privileged to sit here across amazing people like you and many others, and to sit and learn from your stories. And obviously you're going to hear commonalities, it's normal, but everyone's is different. Everyone had a different experience. Everyone learned something and it surprises you, like, oh, even with that, you still were able to, do this. So looking back for you personally, and this is a question, I'll say this live and in real time, that I'm trying to make better and rephrase.
Okay.
Because the question I always want to ask is like, I know you learned a lot in your career, but what's that game changer learning? I feel everyone, at least, and maybe I think the reason I ask that is because sometimes people can't pinpoint one. But I can, so I think that's why it's easier for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But from your perspective, either if there was one piece of advice or a learning that you took with you that really just shattered that ceiling and gave you a new perspective, what was that, and what was that experience?
Look for inspiration in every single thing you do. And what I mean by this is, as human beings, if we're not connected to what we're doing, and if we're not finding daily nuggets and moments of awe and happiness and like, wow, like I get to do that, or oh my God, I just met the most interesting person and I learned so much, or oh, I just got to work on this project and I just I feel so fulfilled. Like if you don't look for moments and if you don't find moments of inspiration, life goes by, becomes just a job. You lose your mojo with every single day.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, that's been mine. Like, again, there's always many, but for me, this transcends all.
Yeah.
And I try to do it. Like today, honestly, like Khalid, you've been amazing. Like you've inspired me to think about, like I've learned from you and your questions and then from the examples that you've been sharing through your other podcasts, and it's made me interested to kind of say, oh my God, I'm going to listen to everyone, and I want to listen to that person who said 5 minutes they know the person in the interview, and I want to learn. Like maybe there's something I'm missing there. So I think find inspiration in everything you do and every person you meet. It just makes life nicer, I guess. First of
all, thank you so much for the very kind words. I really appreciate it. I'm very humbled by that. And I echo what you're talking about. With my podcast, with everything I do, I'm just a curious person and I just want to learn. And I think if you can sit down with someone and have an engaging conversation, oh my God, the value you can get out of that.
Can you share with me yours though? Because you said you had one.
Oh, mine? Yeah, absolutely. So for me, my game changer learning, I don't know if I've talked about it on this podcast, on AUD's podcast, on mine I've many times. For me, what really changed my entire life was when I learned to take accountability. For a very long time in my life, it was never my fault. It was always the world. Oh, he said that, he did that, and until one thing happened, and I had to, for the first time, like it was the first time in my life, I looked in the mirror and to look at yourself and be like, this is
you.
Listen, circumstances might have been unfair, but you have to but you had a hand to play in this. Don't pretend you didn't.
Yeah.
And for me, so when I learned to take accountability like that for me, that's the reason, and alhamdulillah, I'm sitting with you here today. That changed my entire life.
I love that.
So that was mine. That's why I ask everyone, because I'm like, I think I just realized in this podcast, because I was hoping not everyone has to have that, but you had something like that just like, everything changed.
I love that. I think, and to your point, I think people experience that at different moments in their life.
Of course, yeah.
So they might have not found what that is yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it would come, and that can change. Like the importance of this for you has changed for now. There might be a new era that's waiting for you right around the corner. But I definitely love that. Thank you. I learned from that. Thank you.
No, Siwar, thank you so much for our conversation today. This was amazing. I've had so much fun. I've really learned a lot from you about just, people and psychology. It's an area that I'm obsessed with as well. So it's very easy to go, to speak to someone about this. Yeah. I think there's so much that people can take from this that would help them, whether you're a young student, whether you're an HR professional, or whatever the case. I think there's a lot of value that you gave us in this episode. So thank you so much. If people want to reach out with you, work with you guys, connect, what's the best way for us to get in touch?
So
there you go. See,
right?
LinkedIn.
We need to be consistent. Siwar Zein.
Siwar Zein.
SIWARZEIN.
Done.
You'll find me.
You'll find her on LinkedIn, guys. Siwar, thank you again so much. This has been an absolute pleasure. To everyone listening, guys, please make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the podcast. And we'll see you all next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the AUD podcast channel. We really hope that you enjoyed it and learned something from it. We have a lot of incredible guests lined up for you on the show, and we're so excited to bring you their inspiring stories. To stay up to date with all the latest episode releases, please make sure to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the podcast on the AUD Instagram page at AUD Dubai.